Today we'll be taking our very first look at the legendary tier French cruiser Henri IV. I'll put my commander build up on the screen now, and keep in mind as we run down the stats that the stats will be influenced by this build. It's Andre Roux. Normally I run Le Monnier on all the French cruisers, but for this particular one, it's got larger guns than most of the rest, and they take an awfully long time to traverse 180 degrees. It's actually near 40 seconds if you don't have the ingenious skill buffing them, in which case I think I've got it just under 30 seconds. Still pretty slow for a cruiser, but much more manageable. Plus, Roux buffs the maneuverability of the ship, and he also buffs the maximum HE damage. So the numbers I read you for that are going to be influenced by his base trait, which does that. Anyway, let's run down the stats and talk about how the ship plays. I'll say right off the bat, I really love this thing. This is probably my favorite ship to come out in the update. The TLDR here is basically this is a very souped up and jacked Charles Martel. But anyway, Henri IV has 53,300 hit points, which I think is pretty robust for a cruiser, right up in line with the rest of the legendary tiers. Might have more hit points than the typical ones. I think it is pretty comparable to Alaska, though. The guns, though. That's the main highlight on this ship. It's got 9 of them, much like the Charles Martel or the San Luis, but the difference here is that these guns are not 203s. They are 240 millimeters in size. With the Roux build, the range is not spectacular. It's 16.8, but I think you can get it up to 17.3 if you run the epic version of the battle propensity flag. Reload time is 11 seconds, but I am using the Epic Reload mod, so we get, I think, minus 2% on the reload for every 30,000 damage we do. And then you can get it up into sort of the low 10-second, high 9-second range. But the HE on these guns, well, you see a little bit of it there against the Yamato, but take a look at the Shimakaze. Ask him how he thinks the Henri's HE is. There's 6k on that guy, and in the span of 2 salvos, he is dead. As a devastating strike, actually, and our first kill of the game. The HE on this thing has a maximum alpha strike per shell of 3,536. That is, of course, with the Roux buff that increases the maximum HE damage, but that's a lot of damage for cruiser HE shells to do. They also have a 22% fire chance, but you could buff that to around 25 if you want to use Le Monnier. I just, again, can't really deal with that glacially slow turret traverse. But this is very effective HE, and not only that, but because it's 240 millimeters rather than the usual heavy cruiser size of 203, it can pen more armor. I believe these guns can pen up to at least 40 millimeters of armor, and you get that, by the way, by taking the caliber in gun size and dividing by 6 for most ships in this game. That gives you the HE pen of their shells. 240 divided by 6 comes to about 40 millimeters. Therefore, this thing can pen at least 40, unless there's any special penetration rules that apply to the HE. For example, 1/5 or quarter pen. I don't think that's the case here, but that's a lot of penetration for these HE shells, and when they hit the surfaces of cruisers or battleships where they can pen, they do an awful lot of damage. I think we'll see that coming up here against the Petropavlovsk. And of course, the AP is also great. These are bigger guns than your typical cruiser guns, so the AP pen is good, and on top of that, they're French. The AP maximum damage is 6,200 per shell, and they can citadel cruisers all the way across the map due to that excellent French pen. But there you see an example of the HE penetrating everywhere on the Petropavlovsk, which is a very heavily armored cruiser, and I think actually has 40mm deck armor. Our HE shells don't care about that. We hit him for like 7k, and against this Des Moines here, I think we're going to be scoring some citadels. Don't know how angled he is, and the shells are, a little bit floaty, so it does seem like you have to add on a bit of extra lead, but that's the same story with the rest of the French cruisers, including my beloved Charles Martel, but yeah, there you go. You see, we citadel the Des Moines all the way across the map, nearly at the end of our range. The pen on these AP shells is excellent. These guns are excellent. I know a lot of people want the Hindenburg to be brought to legendary tier, and I'll tell you the reason that the Hindenburg is desirable is because it's a heavy cruiser with German guns, which do have quarter caliber pen. So I think its HE can pen 40 or 50 millimeters of armor as well. But the thing is, it's German HE, so the maximum damage is going to be fairly anemic compared to this, and I don't know what the fire chance is like on the Hindenburg, but if you're one of those people that is disappointed that the Hindenburg is not here yet, this ship might scratch that itch for you, because the HE performance is phenomenal. Now, onto the torpedoes. It does have some of those. There are only 6 of them. 2 launchers on either side, triple launchers. They reload in 90 seconds, which is fairly speedy. And they do a maximum damage of 14,833, which actually I think sounds kinda low for French torpedoes. Only a 9-kilometer range and a 60-knot speed. I don't really think they come into play all that often. But of course, this ship is very good at zipping around. It does have the 3-minute French engine boost, which can buff its speed to well over 40 knots, although at base, it's got... Actually, these are not the base numbers. This will be influenced by the Andre Roux build, but the maximum speed I've got without the engine boost is 36.8 knots. Very fast for a cruiser. 840-meter turning circle is fairly large, but this is a large ship. And the rudder shift is 7.4 seconds, which is not the fastest, but it's responsive enough, and I suppose you could spec into it if you wanted to, although I really wouldn't. The AA on this ship, well, I guess it's got some of it. It's got 5.4 kilometer AA, or 5.2 kilometer AA guns, but they only do 94 DPS. And then it's got 4.5 kilometer AA guns, which do 204. So I don't know how effective that is. The AA stats in this game are a little bit of a mystery because they don't tell you how many flak bursts that you shoot. And that's kind of key to getting an idea of how effective your AA might be. So kind of don't know for the Henri. It just seems pretty middle of the road. And then we have concealment. I've got 11.6 kilometer detectability by sea. That is, of course, a product of the concealment mod and Gunichi Mikawa as one of the inspirations. So all in all, the Henri IV is a natural sort of successor to the design of the Charles Martel and the Saint Louis at Tier 8. It's basically a similar sort of hull, although it's got better armor. The bow and the stern are 25 millimeters, so they can be overmatched by pretty much anything. But the entire side plate, running from pretty much the front turret all the way back to the rear one, so covering most of the ship, is 30 millimeter plating. Of course, the Yamato can overmatch the 30 millimeter plating everywhere, but anything with 16-inch guns or smaller is going to bounce their AP shells off the Henri's side armor. You're going to need to aim at the bow or the stern if you're playing something like a Montana, or maybe the new Colombo, or even a Conqueror or Borgonia. All of them are going to bounce off Henri's angled side, and more than that, Henri does enjoy what we call that French black hole armor. It's got an armor belt with a lot of space between that armor belt and the citadel. So a lot of times, shells will simply get lost in that space and not really do any damage. You'll see that as we get shot in this game. We'll get hit, we'll take some AP pens, but our armor will come in handy bouncing a lot of the shells, and the black hole armor will do the rest. Although, I will say, I have been citadeled at peculiar angles in this ship, usually right through the stern somehow while kiting away. So it does happen. You do want to be careful, but luckily you do have that French speed boost, and the maneuverability is good enough that you can be dodging fairly effectively in this thing, just like the Charles Martel or even the Saint Louis. So basically the playstyle here is fairly similar. This is sort of a long to medium range HE sniping cruiser that has really good damage with its AP and can do nasty things to cruiser broadsides even at maximum range. I think we'll see that yet again here with this Wooster. But yeah, basically same playstyle as the San Louis or the Charles Martel, except it's got better guns, which do much more damage, and it is much tankier. What's not to love? I honestly don't know. This is definitely my favorite ship of this update, and this may very well be my new stream closer. I usually end all of my streams with a game in the Charles Martel, simply because it's one of my favorite cruisers in the whole game, and I find the performance to be consistent enough that I can usually get a really high damage game out of it to end the stream. The same is very much true for me so far in the Henri. The unfortunate part is, when I was playing this ship last night, well, I mean, you can kind of see the game playing out in front of you. The enemy team basically has all the caps. They've got 700-something points to our nearly 200, and we don't have any source of points income now because we don't hold any of the caps. Plus, there's 4 of us left versus 5 enemies, one of whom is a destroyer, and one of whom is the Yamato. Of course, the enemies are pretty much all in the same part of the map, but the DD and one of the cruisers are in Bravo. So we're trying to move in here to maybe pull this game back from the brink. Spoiler alert, it isn't going to happen. Actually, I had some very rough games in this thing, not because the ship is bad, but because the teams weren't exactly bad, or exactly good. The game I had right before this was a 200,000 damage loss, and I decided not to put that one up because I don't know that there's a bunch of shots of shooting cruisers at max range with AP and showing off how that works, or dev striking a destroyer. But if you do want to see that 200,000 damage Henri the Fourth loss, then let me know in the comments. It's a terrible tragedy, so it'll probably depress you, but I'd be happy to do a commentary on it, because I love this ship. In any case, I'd highly recommend it. I think this is one of the strongest cruisers we have right now in the Legendary tier, and it really fulfills that role of a cruiser. And what I mean by that is battleships are sort of like the tank class and also the barbarian or brute class, right? They deliver huge alpha punches from all the way across the map, and they can absorb a lot of incoming fire. DDs are like the scouts that can torpedo the larger capital ships and also find the enemy DDs and duel them with their guns. Those are sort of the roles of those two classes. Meanwhile, cruisers have, compared to the other two, the highest damage potential in the game, but they don't have a lot of armor, generally speaking. So really what they are sort of support ships whose goal is to deal as much damage as possible and support both the battleships and the cruisers as they try to get their jobs done. That's sort of how I see the role of the cruiser. You really want a cruiser that can pump out a ton of damage, and the Henri definitely fits that description. This thing pumps out a ton of damage. We're going to end up with about 150, 160 before this game is over, and like I said, I've scored more damage than that. This thing really does fulfill the role of the cruiser. It absolutely brutalizes anything that's pushing into it, rather. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, they stand no chance, especially with the reload boosters. And of course, this thing does have a heal. Don't think I mentioned that, but also take a look too at the epic reload mod procced maximum here 5 times. Our reload is like 10 seconds on these guns, and that is really great. But this game is not great. 3 red ships still floating. Yamato is about to go down. Wooster is on his last legs too, but there's about 30 seconds left to go. We're going to try to get some shots on the Wooster here, and I think we are going to end up taking him out, us and our 2 cruiser teammates, which leaves only the Des Moines left. And theoretically, we could win the game right here with this salvo of the AP against the Des Moines broadside. But I think he is a little bit angled, and I think our lead wasn't exactly on point, so we get one single penetration before the Des Moines is able to slip away, and take the win for his team. Very close. I was really hoping that we'd be able to land that shot and take out the Des Moines and end this in spectacular fashion, but of course, like most games, after an update drops, it ends in horrible tragedy. Still, I think it gives you a good idea of what to expect from the Henri. Like I said, I've got more footage than this that I can make some videos out of, so if you want to see more Henri action with more damage, let me know. But I highly recommend starting this Bureau project. I think this ship is great, and I think it's really fun to play. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.